Welcome to DejaVue, your favorite Vue podcast. But you maybe don't know it yet, but we've got a bunch of episodes so far, so you've had probably like 41 other chances to figure out if this is your favorite Vue podcast. But I mean, let's just get into this one. I've got with me Adam Jahr from Vue Mastery. You've probably heard of Vue Mastery. They've been around a long time, producing lots of amazing content, and this is the guy behind it. And he also does lots of amazing talks. And yeah, I'm so glad to have you here. How are you doing, Adam?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. We last saw each other over in Toronto, so it's nice to see you. We actually got a guest star here. My cat decided to join, so
Oh, nice.
guess he wants to say hi too. But yeah, it's nice to see you since we saw each other over in Toronto, and nice to talk about the things that we love the most, which is nerdy stuff and producing technical content and all that jazz.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've probably seen from the whatever the title is of this episode, but we're mostly going to be getting into creating technical content. And I think even if you're not trying to like make courses or anything like that, I think it's still a useful topic because we're all in a way communicating with technical concepts where every day we're writing pull requests and trying to explain things to product managers and writing documentation for other developers and things like that. So I think it's a broadly useful topic for everyone involved.
Right. Or you're mentoring a junior developer or something like that. It's always nice to be able to know how to communicate your ideas in a way that resonates and lands.
Yeah. And I think one thing that I've seen from a lot of people is that when they're hiring, they try to look for, can someone communicate these topics really well? And so it appears that the job market right now is pretty tough. So maybe that's an area where some of you can improve upon, and maybe this episode will help you with that. But before we get to that, can you take me through what Vue Mastery is? Because I'm sure not everyone knows what Vue Mastery is and how you got started with Vue Mastery and, you know, your story of getting into Vue as well with that.
Sure. Yeah. So Vue Mastery, as it sounds, it's a way to master Vue. So we're a platform that is totally dedicated to being a resource for Vue developers, whether they're just getting started with the platform or they're deepening their knowledge from maybe intermediate to expert. We have content for all levels, and it's mostly video platform, but we also have all of our video content is also in written format. We have an active blog, as well as we host conference talks from Vue conferences around the world. So it's really kind of a one-stop shop to get a lot of Vue content all in one place. So in terms of how I got started in it, so some of y'all listening might be familiar with Code School. That was a big platform back in the 2010s mostly. And that was founded by my current business partner, Greg Pollock. We're both from the Orlando tech scene. So back about a little over 7 years ago, I was just ending my time at an in-person coding bootcamp where I was helping guide students through a really grueling 12-week process where they were going from really any diverse background, whether it was serving, bartending, being a, not even having gone to college or having any formal training in technology, and really elevating them to the point of employability through that 12-week process. And so that really taught me a lot about what it takes to teach, and to teach in a way that really leads to competence and confidence as well. So that really informed everything I do today. But so I was ending my stint there, and Greg had just sold his Code School to Pluralsight, and got to talking and ideated on really combining our efforts into a devoted platform. And we really liked Vue, and coincidentally, I'm not sure if I told you this, Michael, but we were producing content out of Greg's Condo, which was at the Vue, same spelling, Vue. And so we were playing around with some different technologies, figuring out what we really wanted to truly devote a platform to. And all signs, literally the sign on his building was pointing to Vue. So we went all in and have been creating content ever since, and have a library of almost 60 courses now. So started from the ground up and have been pounding the pavement since. And that's what we love to do. We're really passionate. We're just educators at heart, as well as have a sense for visualizing concepts, which we can get into in more depth. But we just love teaching and love to really facilitate those aha moments and have people have those moments where things just click. And so we love to produce that experience for people.
So from your coding bootcamp days, are there any like particular lessons or insights that you remember from that bootcamp, like, and taking people through that 12-week process?
Yeah, I would say probably the biggest is that whenever you're teaching someone, again, we went over kind of the different use cases. If it's whether you're formally producing, video you want to post on YouTube that teaches something, or you're teaching a new member of your team that is junior, it's important not to make assumptions about what they already know. I think it's difficult for developers sometimes to take a step back because they're so close to, the experience of what they've been doing for years, and they do it every day. So it comes so naturally and it feels almost like second nature to them. But it's about taking that step back and remembering what it's like to be in the position of not knowing, and really teaching is creating that bridge to like where you are from where they are. And so it's really a bridge built with empathy. And so you can't really build that bridge without, if you're making assumptions about where they already are. Right. So regardless of like who you're teaching, that is a thing you're always going to have to keep in mind. Of course, if you're like mentoring someone face to face, you can establish that fairly quickly and then go from there. But if you don't know who your audience is, then the fewer assumptions you're making, then the more effective your content is going to be.
Yeah, this is something I think I've struggled with myself, especially because like when I'm writing an article or something, or putting together a course, I always think it needs to be insightful and useful and valuable. But my own gauge on whether something is useful is kind of broken, because like I've been doing this for so long that I know a lot of stuff that like a lot of people don't. And so what's useful or interesting to me is totally different than what's useful or interesting to other people. And so a lot of times I think, oh, this article I've written is kind of boring. It's kind of obvious stuff. Like everyone knows this. But then it turns out that that's actually the article that people love the most and is most useful, because, oh, it was just me that knows that because I read the documentation all the time, and no one like reads the documentation line by line, but I do. And so then like I know about this stuff, but not everyone else does. And so it's hard to take that step back and to like separate yourself and figure out like, okay, what is common knowledge and what is my knowledge? Or like maybe you don't even need to think about what common knowledge is, but just like, yeah, I don't know, somehow getting past that all is, that's been difficult for me.
Yeah, it can be tough, especially if it's something that you're really familiar with, to like create that distance from something that you're just innately close to. But there's different ways to go about it. But I think having that as just like the voice in the back of your mind, like, am I making assumptions here? Or like, I guess a better question is, what assumptions am I making? Because regardless, you're going to be making some assumptions, and some assumptions are going to be helpful because you might be specifically having an audience in mind that, maybe they are already Vue 2 users and you're creating a migration guide to Vue 3 or something. So then the assumptions you're going to be making are very specific. So so I think that question, what assumptions should I be making? And then should I not be making? And use that as like the foundation to then build the lesson or whatever you're building from.
Yeah. So, okay. So you did your coding bootcamp, then you and Greg started to come up with some ideas, and you settled on Vue. What happened from there? You started Vue Mastery, and around what time was this that you started this?
This was back in the summer 2017 when we got started on this.
Okay.
And like I said, we hit the ground running pretty fast in terms of like creating a lot of momentum in different ways. So we first, before we actually did anything, we created our Vue Essentials cheat sheet. And that was a way to start to kind of get our name out there, start to build our email list as well. And simultaneously, we were producing our Intro to Vue course. We were also establishing relationships within the Vue community with Vue core team members, with Evan Yu himself, Chris Fritz at the time, who was a big force in the documentation in the early days of Vue. He's an excellent teacher in his own right, and learned a lot from collaborating with him. Worked with Damien Duliche. He was producing at the time the official Vue newsletter. And we would then translate that into the official Vue News podcast back in the day. So we did a number of episodes of that over a couple of years, and got good traction there in terms of people enjoying the content, because it was essentially us summarizing the week's news, whether that was, a version release or new articles that would come out by sometimes yourself, and a nice kind of verbal summary of the things to know for that week in Vue. So yeah, we're kind of doing multiple things at the same time, building out our YouTube channel and our Twitter at the time, and all while simultaneously doing the meat of what we do and what we do best, which is producing that content library, which we were producing like kind of course after course. I was working on something while Greg was working on something, and built that pretty quickly over time in terms of working with different contractors, different content creators in the Vue community. Ben Hong, Natalia Teplahina, people, Marina Mosti, people like that. And yeah, it's been a really great experience of expanding into the Vue community, going to a bunch of different conferences, getting to meet the people who, I think we've talked about before, how conferences are really a special experience, because when you're teaching, you're just, speaking into the camera, and you don't really get to have the experience of like a traditional teacher does, of caring for that student in real life and seeing the aha moments happen in real time. And you're a teacher to students who are kind of just nameless and faceless. But
you don't really get feedback from people otherwise. But at conferences, I've had people, every single time I go to a conference, people come up to me and say, "Oh, this article, I learned this from you," or "this course I took or workshop." Like, we've been, a year later, we're still using that pattern all the time in our code base because of what you taught us. Whereas an email, I occasionally get an email that's like, "Course is great," and that's it. So it's totally different.
Yeah, it's a really great way to get feedback, whether that's constructive criticism or like those really validating moments where someone says like, you helped me learn Vue, and now now I'm employed, and you learning with you helped me get a job using this technology, and you realize the impact that you can have as an educator, because you can really help people help themselves to take themselves to that next step. Yeah, so it kind of tangented there, but yeah, the conferences have been a really special part of growing the company in terms of having that human element along the way. But yeah, that's basically the story, and we've been doing that ever since over the past 7 years, and are now at a point that we have a really solid library with a bunch of different learning paths for different experience levels, different playlists that are organized into different categories, whether you're looking to get into Nuxt or state management or testing, things like that.
Yeah. And I've written some stuff for you in the past. And yeah, I think there's a lot of great content on your platform. And yeah, 7 years is a pretty long time. So yeah, congrats on building this up to what it is. And yeah, I hope that there's a lot more to come as well.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been fun, and it's been cool seeing over the years as well people finding their own success in teaching Vue. And like I mentioned, we watched your writing evolve from doing your blog posts to creating your own content and creating your own personal brand around teaching Vue, which has been awesome to see.
Yeah, thanks. So I want to ask a question that's entirely selfish because I don't know how many people watching this will care about this question. But I was wondering, as you were describing this, you're talking about your marketing efforts and your content creation efforts. I'm just wondering, like, how do you think about, maybe it's different then versus now, the split between how much effort do you put into creating the content that people pay for versus the free stuff that you give away to grow your audience and, contribute back to the community and get your name out there.
Yeah, you're definitely right that it was different in terms of like a lot of the early stuff. We were just giving it away for free because you want to build your audience and kind of prove your value first to show that you know what you're doing in terms of you can teach effectively and get people to competency quickly. And so in our early days, we were doing a lot of that and carried that forward, and we still do that in different ways. So in every course that we have, we start with the first few lessons are free. So that is not like all locked behind this like mystery box. You can get a sense for, is this content something that I'm like resonating with? Like, am I finding it, stimulating? Am I starting to learn something? Am I vibing with the teacher and their teaching style? And there's takeaways just from that free content, but it's also a way to show people that, like, give them a chance to decide if it's for them or not before fully committing, which I think is important. All of our cheat sheets as well are free. Conference talks are all free as well. And our intro to Vue 3 course, and we have a Vue 2 course as well. That is entirely free. All lessons of that being free. And additionally, we do usually twice a year, a free weekend. That was kind of a baton that was passed from Vue School to Vue Mastery, which that was an important thing that Greg was doing and wanted to continue to do together with Vue Mastery, which is, as it sounds, it's a weekend of us totally unlocking all of our course content for people to learn as much as they can over that weekend. So that's, like I said, something we do a couple times a year. It's quite popular and great way for people to learn a lot with no financial obligation. And it's important to us to give people that option a couple times a year.
So would you is it like I guess you have a whole bunch of different things, so it's not really a complete like split of we spend this much time on free stuff versus this much time on paid stuff. It's kind of like a mix, because like you produce the courses that people pay for, but then you give it the first bits away for free, and then you have these free weekends a couple times a year, and so it's sort of like not a clear-cut answer for that question. So
like if I were to like divide it into numbers, as I would say maybe like 20 to 30% of our content is free, but we don't necessarily approach it like that. We just make sure that people have the opportunity to learn with us if they didn't have the financial opportunity to, and also that people have the opportunity to learn some of what we're sharing without having to commit to a subscription with us, and give people the opportunity to truly understand if this is the learning style that vibes with them.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point, that there's like a bunch of people teaching things on Vue out there, but everyone's got a different style and a different thing that they focus on, and a different like format. Like some people like to read books, and some people like the video courses. Some people like to do live workshops where it's just like a single day. They don't have to like try and find time in their calendar for it. It's like blocked out for them essentially. And beyond that, there's even like different people have different styles of teaching and all this sort of stuff. So I think that it's interesting that like there's room for a lot of different people to teach or to talk about content. And like, just because someone has written about a concept before doesn't mean that you can't have your own take on it, or like you might come at it from a different angle or touch on different points or whatever. And so like there's always so much room for more people to contribute.
Yep, exactly. We all know from our own educational experiences in and outside of tech, even if we look back to, high school days or whatnot, we always had those favorite teachers and the ones that we learned from best. And that's going to apply for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And so that kind of underpins part of the why for sharing some of our content for free.
Yeah. So in Toronto, you had a talk on teaching developers. Can you share a bit about that, like this framework that you've developed and how that all works and how you think about creating good content and good like documentation and stuff in that sense?
Yeah. So the talk was titled "How to Reach and Teach Developers," and it essentially is my mental model, which I think is a pretty replicatable model for exactly what the title says of how to really get not just your content out there, but your product out there, yourself out there, whatever your goal is for reaching developers and educating them into that path of forward momentum toward whatever goal it is that you want them to join you with, whether that's, in my case, joining my learning platform and becoming a subscriber and, being in my community of learners, or if it's someone who is maybe running an open source project, maybe they built a plugin, or maybe maybe they built like a SaaS product and they want to reach and have developers adopt that product. It's really a mental model for any of those use cases and more unmentioned ones. And really, it's an adaptation of the hero's journey. I'm not sure if you're familiar with like Joseph Campbell and kind of how he had mapped that and found.
I've heard of that hero's journey before, and like in the storytelling arc and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah,
Very vaguely familiar.
Right. So it's basically the stories that we all know and love. It's like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Indiana Jones. There's so many stories that follow this hero's journey arc. And early on, I realized that arc could be mapped over to the developer's journey. And it really maps into several steps. And I basically condensed from like Joseph Campbell's into fewer, just for simplicity's sake. But it starts with developer that you're trying to reach. They're in their ordinary world. And this is similar to, if we're looking at, say, Harry Potter, it's him before he goes to Hogwarts. He's in his, the Muggle world before he even knew that this magic existed. And then they get the call to adventure. So the ordinary world in a developer sense is, maybe they're struggling with the same tools that aren't fully getting them where they want to be, or they have these frustrations, or maybe they don't quite understand something. It's the daily struggles, the daily frustrations. And then the call to adventure is your offering to them, whether that's, in my or your case, offering them advanced understanding and competency through the path of education that you're presenting to them, or it's a new tool that you built that's going to make their lives easier. That call to adventure happens in multiple ways, but in many ways it happens through content. It happens through articles, documentation, videos, and you're essentially able to express that call to action in different ways, whether that's also like the website and the calls to action you have on there. They basically are a way to expose the developer to this new potential, this path. Right. It's like the bridge of where they are to where they want to be. And yeah, go ahead.
So this call to adventure is sort of like the trigger that like, oh, you want to integrate Google Maps into your app, but you've never done that before. So then now you have to go from the state before where you're just kind of cruising along as normal, and then now you have to like, there's this whole new challenge, I guess, like to figure out how does this work.
Yep,
Is
exactly.
that right?
Yeah, in like the educational sense, it'd be like that. So you want to be able to know how to do this thing.
Yeah.
That's like the invitation, the call to adventure. In the more like SaaS product space, it's so you want your life to be easier doing X, Y, Z.
Hmm.
We simplify that process. You start in your ordinary world. You get that call to adventure, and in Harry Potter, it's like he receives a letter, and there's always in these stories in the classic hero's journey, the hero is refusing the path in some way. They're doubting for whatever reasons, and in terms of how we map that over to like the developer's journey, that might be them doubting that your tool is going to do what you claim it to do, or they're going to doubt that they're truly going to gain the knowledge and experience from your course that you promise that it will. Or, maybe they're just having self-doubt and imposter syndrome.
Or even not wanting to put in the time or effort to learn a new thing. That's what I find for myself is,
Right.
do I really want to spend this time? Or, I mean, I have to solve the problem somehow. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So in different ways along this journey towards really it's a journey of mastery and return to the ordinary world with newfound experience. It's like
Right.
returning, like completing Zelda, and you return with like the Master Sword. But the key part of getting developers past that like refusal of the path, it comes down to, in all of these stories, like the mentor, and that's Gandalf, that's Dumbledore, that's the wise sage that helps instill the confidence and clarity that really illuminates that path forward. And so that's where I argue the really quality content serves its purpose. That's where really well done docs serve their purpose. That's where really excellent both like explainer videos that explain like the why, but then like getting started tutorials and courses that explain the how are essential to whether it's an open source project you're trying to market, or it's a SaaS product that you're trying to get people to gain quick competency with. And we can go into more nuance soon about like what meeting that mentor looks like, and what truly creating quality content looks like, because there's different formulas to achieve that. But really the role of that quality content is to mentor people so that they can cross that threshold and they continue to deepen their skills in the hero's journey. That's called like the inmost cave, where maybe that's where they go past like the getting started tutorials and they're starting to read migration guides or advanced tutorials, and they're really starting to apply, instead of just like demo apps and abstract concepts, they're applying the tech to their own problems and solving their own issues with that. And ultimately, they have the breakthrough. And with that, they essentially are able to return back to where they started, return to the Shire in the Lord of the Rings,
Right.
but with that newfound knowledge. And through that, they can become advocates of whatever you offered them and provided value and transformation to them with. So yeah, so in terms of like what we do with Vue Mastery, if we do our job well and we help people learn more than they did before, if we help them get a job, and they're going to share that with people. If open source plugin does its job, it's going to spread like wildfire because developers are going to tell other developers about it. So really, the hero's journey can be a system not only for educating people into whatever you want to add value to their experience with, but also it's a system to create advocates through, and genuine advocates, because you added value to and ease to their life.
Yeah, so it doesn't just end with them having figured this thing out and now they know how to use Google Maps in their app, or they've learned TypeScript or whatever. There's the final part where they start to use it and then can teach others, can teach their colleagues, their coworkers, can mentor other people, can post about it online or whatever, and kind of like pay it forward in a way.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, it's not just like a model for like, you know, getting what you want out of your tech business, but it's also it's a model for open source, because it's about sharing value, sharing knowledge, sharing skills, and paying that forward.
Yeah, this is a really cool way of thinking about how people end up going through this whole process, because it is like a whole process with all these different sub-steps of this journey, and like how do you help people along each step. It's not just about, you know, writing a single article or putting out a thing, but like, I guess how do you help people in each stage, like when they first get that call to adventure, how are you helping them there versus how are you helping them have the confidence to actually go on this journey, to then how are you helping them, you know, that middle part, which is what we maybe focus on the most, where they're like, okay, I've decided I want to learn this. I'm committed now. Like, let's work through this stuff. But then there's also this last part of, okay, now I've learned this stuff. Are there ways that we can help people who have learned this stuff already, like bring it back to other people? Or yeah, there's a lot more surrounding this than just that core middle part.
Yeah, and the mentor phase, of course, as a, you know, content guy myself and a teacher myself, that's where I focus most of my time and experience. But there's also, you know, when we talk about, you know, you mentioned how do we make it easier for people to share what they've learned. That's about building community. That's about facilitating community. That's about providing excellent, you know, two-way support channels within your company or your project, and being vocal and active in wherever the developers that are engaging with you are, whether that's, you know, in GitHub or Discord or what have you.
Yeah, it's interesting how this also feels very similar to like a product, I guess, like a product sales kind of life cycle, where you start with people not aware of a problem, then they realize they've got a problem, then they like go searching for different products to solve their problem, and then eventually they like, you know, that middle part is like a sales process usually of like, you know, either you've got some website that makes a sale, or you've got like actual salespeople that do a call or whatever, and then you've got the end part where you've got like word of mouth marketing and trying to get people to like promote it to other people. So it's like a very, it's a very like universal process that goes throughout all these things.
Yeah, it can apply to a lot, because it's like crossing the threshold in this could mean, to your point, like a sale conversion, and then the like inmost cave could be about like supporting like the customer support that you're providing that user of your SaaS product, so that you retain them, especially if you're a recurring revenue business, so that your retention stays high and people are not, you know, bleeding out of your company. It can apply to many different perspectives, which is why I like it and think it's worth sharing. And like I said, very replicatable regardless of what your goal is, because ultimately everyone has a vision of where they want to be, and they're here, and your goal is to help them get there.
Yeah. So now I'm thinking like wondering how do I take this idea and apply it to my own stuff? I mean, if you have like super tactical stuff, I would love to hear it. But I mean, I'm definitely going to be thinking about this and how I can apply it. But yeah, this is really some really cool ideas in here.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway is it's about how are you adding value to someone's life, and how are you like being of service to them in a way that allows them to get to where they want to be faster. And sometimes that's about illuminating clarity about where they can be going, because some people might like have a lack of clarity of like where they can go, and the hero's journey model can actually be a way to show them like what's possible. And that's adding value in and of itself, because it adds direction and purpose and momentum to someone's life.
Yeah, the most interesting part to this is the refusal of the call aspect, where people are like not sure, not confident that they actually want to do this thing. And I never like, that doesn't usually go into my mental model. Usually I'm like, oh, people want to learn this thing. And like, that's, you just go and learn it. And I think it's not always the case. And people have, like, for me, I think my prior experiences, especially through university, kind of helped me with that, where I don't have as much self-doubt, I guess, in a way. Like, so one story that I think is really interesting that I like sharing with people is I had this professor who was in his 70s, I think, and he played World of Warcraft, which was pretty interesting in and of itself.
Yeah.
And he was saying he did his computer science degree in the 70s, which at that time, computer science wasn't really a thing. It was like brand new, basically. And he, on the last day of class, I remember him bringing in this computer that he built when he was in university. Like, I don't know, this would have been like 40 years earlier. And it was literally, this was before the Macintosh, before, before personal computers. And he said he got this bag of parts and he had to solder everything together. He had to write the code himself. And when he debugged some problems, he had to also debug the hardware thing because he might have soldered something, or like maybe there was a short somewhere. And that kind of was mind-blowing. But then he also talked about how he got a printer. But in order to connect the printer in, it wasn't like we do today where you just like plug it in.
Right.
Or, if you've got a wireless printer, you just connect it up and away you go. He had to solder together and build the printer port. And then he had to write the driver for the printer.
Wow.
And had to like debug all this stuff. And I was just like, wow, like it made me realize that all of this stuff that we take for granted when we run our computers, it was like all built by someone. Someone wrote that software. There's someone who knows how this stuff works. And I guess that, like, reflecting on that over a period of time, I just realized, and I think it like very deeply internally changed the way that I think about things, where I realized after that people can just make stuff. Like, all of this software is, if I had enough time, I could figure out how someone would write an operating system, and it would take me a really long time, but it's something that can be figured out and can be understood and can be built, because obviously people have built operating systems. And, I'm not going to do that because I don't have that much time and I'm not that interested. Right. But you can build your own programming language or your own JavaScript framework, or whatever. Like, you can just like build stuff. And because of that, I sort of learned that. So I think, I wonder if in some ways that whole experience sort of shaped my understanding. And so I don't have this refusal of the call as much as I might have before. And so when I'm thinking about content, I don't necessarily recognize that struggle in other people. And I'm sure that I do have this struggle of doubt or fear or whatever in other ways that I probably don't even realize. But yeah, that was like a really long tangent, but I think that that's a really interesting aspect of it that I haven't really thought about a lot, of giving people confidence, or even just like knowing that there is a path out there to learn, that there are these things out there. So that's my long tangent for the day.
Yeah, it made me think of how like a refusal of the path these days is also, I mentioned like it could be because someone's doubting that like you're going to do what you say that you're promising, or maybe it's like imposter syndrome. But I think maybe more than ever and more than anything these days, don't necessarily have the time, or think that they have the time, or they like, you have a very short window to communicate what your call to adventure is, and like quickly show what you're like offering to take them on in terms of this journey, and in your case the learning journey. So I think attention span in a very divided amongst many platforms and devices and what have you is part of that refusal of the path these days, perhaps more than any other factor. And so you mentioned like, do I have tips for like how to map this over to your podcast? So how in like a lot of the like big podcasts, like sometimes I watch like Diary of the CEO and things like that, where they start off with like clips like of the most interesting moments of the episode. And really, what is that? That's helping to ease that refusal of like, do I want to watch this? Do I want to like invest my watch time into this video because there's so many that I could watch? So that's like the call to adventure is like the title and the thumbnail, and then the easing of the refusal of the path is like, hey, like there's value, there's interest, there's takeaways in here. And like, you know, of course they're showing it in like kind of teasing like cliffhanger ways, but they're proving value very, very quickly to help convince people to go on that adventure. In this case, watch the whole podcast. So yeah, it can be mapped to many different things.
Yeah, I've seen that in some other podcasts, and I do like that because I do find myself, you know, the first 10 seconds, they like have like a sentence and they like cut it off partway through and you're like, oh, but what did they say? And then you're like, I'm interested in what, like, there's that interesting moment somewhere in this podcast. I want to listen for that. They hooked you. And so we've been thinking about how to do more like shorts and like find these like interesting clips and like pull them out and stuff like that. And I think that's a good way to do that too, of putting that up front. You know, a podcast is a big investment, and even if you listen to it on 2 times speed, it's like can be 30 minutes that you have to sit there and listen. And on YouTube we have chapters, so you can jump around between the different sections and find what's interesting. But even then, it's it's nice to know, oh, there's this interesting stuff coming.
Right. Do you know there's actually a term for that, like those like kind of, you know, showing like just enough, but like it leaves you with that sensation of like, I want to like, you know, like close that. It's called creating an open loop. And and then like the closing of the loop is like that desire to close the loop is what helps like encourage people to like stick with you. So there's a bit of like psychological manipulation in there, admittedly.
Yeah, but in a good way. So like, I think the open loop stuff is also done in storytelling, where it's like you always want to have at least one thing that's open. So you kind of like overlap them and nest them together, so that like in a TV show, you're going to open up a bunch of like these curiosity things at the beginning. Like if it's a crime show, it's like, you know, they find some body somewhere and then they're like, okay, who did it? And then along the way, there's a bunch of mysteries that they sort of like come up, and then they resolve them, and then they come up and they resolve them. And then by the end, they've resolved most of the things, and like then they resolve the full that crime for that episode. But then like maybe there's like some drama between 2 of the main characters or something that happened, and then they open that in that episode, but they don't close it. They wait till the next episode to close it, so that you like get pulled through to the next episode, because you're like, well, what happens? What happens to their big fight? You know, and so then they kind of pull you through in that way. I've kind of thought about that in terms of technical content, but I don't like it's harder to do that kind of a thing.
Part of it's in like, you know, previewing like the learning objectives for that piece of content. Like, you know, by the end of this article, you'll be able to do X, Y, Z, and that kind of gets you there. But yeah, it's interesting once you like start to like perceive content, whether it's entertainment or otherwise, like with like open loops and like hero's journey, you start to see how like there's actually a formula to a lot of it.
Yeah, well, it's like one of those effects where like I haven't done as much music stuff for a while, but in high school I was in a rock band and I played a lot of guitar and like did music production, all that kind of stuff. But then every time I would go see a band live, I would just be like distracted with like, oh, what's their guitar setup like? Oh, they've got these 3 guitars. Oh, I wonder what, like, do they have different tunings on the guitars, or like why do they have it set up like that? Or like the keys player, oh, he's got this set up, like what's going on there? And like maybe you are behind the sound booth and then I'm like seeing, okay, like how is he doing this part here, and like what's the lighting guy doing? And I was just like not even paying attention to what's going on,
like being in the moment.
I'm just like analyzing it. And so then, you know, starting this podcast, whenever I listen to a podcast, I'm like, oh, maybe we should be doing something like that, or oh, they did
Mm-hmm.
their opening intro. They had this like teaser hook thing. Maybe I should be doing that, and like
Right.
not actually like paying attention, but yeah.
It's funny you say that about like the being at a concert and analyzing all that, because I produce music as well, but like mostly ambient music, like meditative, soundscapey music. And so it's like a double-edged sword of like I love it, and like the production of it is quite meditative for me. But whenever I'm like listening to someone else's track, I'm like totally in analytical mode. So it's like having the opposite. I'm
Yeah.
not like meditating or like often, in oneness with the universe. I'm like, oh, that delay is really nice. So it's like
Yeah.
just pulling me out. So it's had a 1-2 punch of good and bad results of going deep into meditative music production.
Yeah, I've had this experience way too many times that like a couple of years ago I started getting into bread baking, and like now
Mm-hmm.
I haven't done as much recently because I've just been like busy with a new baby and stuff, but like I have my own mill, and I get the wheat berries and I mill it, and then I make my sourdough and I do the whole,
Mm-hmm.
like I've got the whole process. But now it's to the point where like any place I go, like some restaurant or whatever, then I'm like open the bread and I'm like looking at the crumb structure, and I'm like,
Uh-huh.
I'm like tasting it. I'm like, wait, what am I
Yeah.
doing here?
Right.
And so it's like, okay, if I'm gonna start a hobby or like get into something, I have to really decide like, do I want to have the chance that I might ruin this for myself because
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
get too into it that I can't
Yeah. Just
actually
be in the
enjoy it.
moment.
So
Yeah. Yeah. There's always that risk for sure. Even, as developers, I'm sure most people listening, for me, my biggest trigger is when like UI is just like terrible, unintuitive, or of course just
yeah,
buggy. And I'm just like, why is it like this? And like when you know better, it's like you're almost like more frustrated by those things.
yeah. We had this experience. Me and my wife had booked a vacation a couple of years ago, and we booked this one Airbnb, or it wasn't an Airbnb. It was just like a regular bed and breakfast. And to do so, we had to go to their website,
Mm.
which was like, okay, it looks like it was made 15 years ago and they haven't updated it since. The booking page was just all freeform text. So like the date that you're going to arrive, freeform text. The date that you're going to leave, freeform text. Like how many people are going, freeform
Mm-hmm.
text, all of it. And so I was like, I bet that this form just sends an email to this person with all the answers, like, and that's it,
Right.
like to the person running it. And
Mm-hmm.
sure enough, when we got the email, like your booking is confirmed, it was like a reply to this email that they got that was just like, just take all the text from the form, put it in an email, away you go. And
There you go.
that's all they needed. So
Booked and
worked
ready.
for them.
Yeah. We just kind of have to go with the flow sometimes. I get myself kind of too twisted up and wishing good UI was universal, but not quite the case.
Yeah. Now that we've gone on that big digression,
Mm-hmm.
is there anything else in terms of creating content that you'd like to touch on?
Yeah, so I kind of mentioned about like the meeting the mentor stages. There's some key elements of what makes good content, and I'm sure we can go back and forth on this from both of our different perspectives. Kind of brought up one of the biggest ones, which is around not making any assumptions. And of course,
Yeah.
whenever I'm saying making content, I'm really talking about teaching. So this also applies to mentoring, and it could even apply to if you're in a job interview and you're explaining the code that you just solved. But not making any assumptions. Also, I think when people go into, maybe they watch a bunch of developers with their own channels on YouTube, and they're inspired to make their own channel and make their own content, they get kind of intimidated by all the different steps that might go into it, whether that's, starting to build your own little studio with a mic and camera and some lighting and all that. But most importantly, like what the content production process actually looks like. And what I would say to that is, and this is not the only way to do it, different people do different things, but a really good approach that we do, and it is a way that we've found scales, is start with your code, get really clear on what it is that you're teaching with a really good example. And once you have that kind of finish line, then you're explaining that code. You're writing a very thoughtful article with that hero's journey in mind. Here's, the ordinary world is, as developers, we struggle with X, Y, Z. Wouldn't it be great if we could do X, Y, Z better? In this article, we're going to learn how to do this and that. And then the rest is like the mentorship and helping them reach that newfound place. Again, not making assumptions along the way. And really key here in terms of writing good content, which maps over to reading that into a camera or, using it as a reference script for on-camera work, is I find that the most common thing, whether it's stuff I'm reading from other people on other platforms or blogs, or if it's, people who are just starting to work with me or applying to work with Vue Mastery, it's a lot of people teach the how, and I call it like the repeat after me content. And it's like, first we're going to do this, and then we do this, and then we do this, and here's the end result. And, isn't that great? But it's like, you haven't been that mentor. You haven't shown them the why along with the how. And so then it's like, you kind of just handed that person like cooked fish. And it's like, here's what it looks like for me to cook this fish, but now I haven't taught you to fish. So like, good luck doing anything on your own that is related to this.
Yeah.
So the why is super important. And a lot of people who are just getting started forget that. And it's not just about showing them like the steps, but explaining like, we're using this function here because of this reason, and it's doing this thing, and it's really important that it's doing it in this way because it's relating to this other thing, and we're using this library because it adds this, new functionality. This library is built on, this pattern, blah, blah, blah. And really baking in that why is what helps build competency and, teaches that person to be able to map that lesson over into their own use case. Yeah, so basically we at Vue Mastery always start with that written content, and then we map that over into that really becomes the script for our video. For us, we do a really visual approach. If you've seen any of our courses, they're animated. There's a lot of like movement on screen. A lot of people might not find that something that's like easy to do or like natural to do, and that's okay. Not every content has to be that way, but if you're kind of interested in what that looks like in terms of like what I have in mind when I'm producing content in a visual way, I always think about like, I don't just want to like say how things work. I want to show how things work. And since I'm working within a visual medium, I have that opportunity. And that goes into things like when you've like screen recorded in many of the editors of that screen recording software that you're going to be using, you have tools that allow you to like zoom in and add like blurs around the things that you don't need the people to be looking at. So you can isolate focus, and that helps you be that mentor that guides their attention. So I always have in mind that like, I have the privilege of being like gifted this person's attention. So I'm going to carefully direct it around the screen and show them what they need to and nothing more than what they need to in order to reduce distraction and amplify clarity step by step. And those things are quite simple to achieve. And I would recommend anyone who's producing screencasts to leverage those built-in tools of that help you isolate focus. And of course, you can go beyond that. We use Keynote to do animations. The process that I would say we use there is you think about like what icon, what image can represent this concept, and then you're bringing that in along with maybe like a text call out So, maybe you're showing code, you isolate focus, you say, this means like this, like maybe you're talking about like state management. And it's like, so this is like a getter. And so you have like, in our case, it's like a mechanical arm that like gets things. So trying to make things that are abstract and just like, it's just characters in a text editor, but how can you bring that to life? How can you make that more tangible? And how can you make that something that someone can grab onto and say, okay, I'm like getting it because I can like see it, and kind of like, it's not just this thing I'm like having to hold in my head, but you've put it in front of me so I can like reduce the burden in my mind at this moment and just like allow you to like show me instead of me like trying to imagine. So if you have that like interest and ability, visualizing that for them is really gonna, especially if they're a visual learner, really gonna help amplify the effectiveness of your content. And the basics of animation are, it can get complex, but it doesn't have to. In something like Keynote or PowerPoint, you have the ability to have 3 states with anything that you're bringing in, whether that's an icon or what have you. You have the build-in state. You have the action it takes when it's on the screen or slide, and then you have the build-out state. And there's often like presets. Maybe it like pops in, maybe it like drops in, and the advice there is, I would say, like in the same way that Google's material design was a way to like make things look and feel more tangible from a UI perspective, you can make your animations feel more tangible by choosing those like presets that just make sense with the action that the object would be taking. So if it's like a sun, it's going to like rise like slowly, and like maybe it's like increasing its scale over time. And so you're thinking about mapping over like how that thing would behave in the real world, and how are you going to choose like the presets in the animation software to make that happen. And so like once you have those like kind of key concepts in mind, and you're have a little bit of like design and artistic style references within you, you can get pretty far with that, and go the extra mile with again making abstract concepts concrete that people can grab onto.
And for these animations, do you like do the animations over the actual screen recording, or do you do like a separate thing that you cut away from the screen recording to this animation and then you cut back?
It depends. Yeah, it really depends. We do both.
So do you import the screen recording into Keynote or whatever, and then you can animate it from there? Or like how do you like do the timing and make sure that lines up?
That's typically what we do, like importing into Keynote, like the video files, and then adding icons over those, and then you can perfectly time it because it's all in one project. But that's not the only way to do it.
Okay. I haven't done this myself, but you can export from Keynote like video files directly.
Yep, exactly. And high quality ones.
Yeah, which is like a neat little hack for doing like motion graphics and animations like you were talking about, because it's like, I'm not going to learn some Adobe whatever the tool is, because that's a whole extra thing, but like I know how to use Keynote and like do magic move and these little transitions. That's not like too much to ask. Like I've fiddled with that before, so it's just like a little bit extra work, more time to like kind of refine them a little bit more, and away you go.
For the listeners who don't know what magic move is, how would you describe what that is?
That's a really good question. It's like it takes the one thing from a slide and to the next slide. So instead of like having to animate things off and then back on again, it like morphs things from one slide to the next. So if you've got like a shape on one slide and then it's bigger on the next slide, magic move will make it just like automatically scale up into the next slide. So you can do some pretty neat things, because you can just like specify the beginning state and then the end state and then do magic move, and it automatically figures out like how to animate between those.
Yeah, it's a super useful tool. So like you get really far, even if you like are just getting started, without doing any animations of
Yeah.
objects themselves. You could just rely on those magic moves and say like, okay, this thing is here on this slide, it's here on this slide. So magic move is just going to take care of it for me. I'm just going to move it over here. But yeah, I think it's important for people to like know that it's possible to get really far with just something like PowerPoint or Keynote, and that they don't have to learn something like After Effects or, you know,
Yeah.
some super involved like timeline based VFX software or animation software. And what is cool about using something like Keynote for your content is that if you then want to, you know, so let's say you create a blog post, you then translate that into a video, you publish that on YouTube, you're really confident about that. You can then submit that video to a conference. And if you had produced that all along in Keynote, you already have your talk prepared.
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty nice to have that as well.
Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking as you're describing this whole animation process that like, I think for some people, they might not need all of that stuff in order to learn it. But what it does is it makes it accessible to more people. So like you could think, well, just talking about programming concepts like we are right now, like if I describe to you an app and like my code and how I changed it, there might be some people who just through like a verbal explanation could understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Not very many people, because it's really difficult to understand just from talking about something. But then, you know, if you added, then you add the screen recording and, or even just like a screenshot of the code along with the video or along with the audio, then more people would be able to figure out what's going on there. And then if you add in the screen recording where you're actually like, maybe you're using your mouse or, you know, showing different files or something like that, then it makes it even easier. And like you can have like these extra levels which just make it more and more accessible and easier to understand. And like there's always going to be a spectrum. Some people are paying more attention to the videos and can understand it better. Other people like to watch it while they're doing other work, and so maybe they need some extra guidance in like what's going on. But and maybe a bunch of other reasons why some people might understand it better than others. But like the more work you do in this way, I think makes it more accessible. And so you have like more people that can understand it. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting approach. And I don't see a lot of people doing the amount of animation and stuff like that as you do with Vue Mastery.
Yeah, I mean it's a rabbit hole for sure, and it's not for everyone. I'm in my free time, and you know, I mentioned like the music side of me, but I'm also I do digital art as well, and kind of combine the visuals with the audio in an artistic sense. So I can go deep with that in a professional capacity with Vue Mastery, because that is something I'm like really passionate about, just period. And I get that not everyone is like that. You know, they might be like, you want me to do what with what? Like that sounds painful and boring, and I have no interest in that. And I get that. And I'm not saying that good content needs that. However, for highly visual learners, they're going to really resonate with highly visual content.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about all this stuff. And
yeah, it's
I've
been
definitely
great.
learned a bunch, and it's always nice to chat with you. And hopefully we can do it in person again sometime soon. Before we go, are there any, like, where can we find you, and how do we get in touch?
Yeah, you can find me and everyone with Vue Mastery over at vuemastery.com. We are also on YouTube, have a channel. We're regularly publishing content over there as well. Of course, all of that is totally free. So if you want to watch some of the lessons that we share over there, you can also find us on X at Vue Mastery. And then me personally, I'm on all the channels at Adam Jahr, last name Jahr. So I'd love to connect with you. Obviously, I like to get nerdy and talk about education and fun stuff like this. So it's a nice conversation with you, Michael. We're kindred spirits in this way. So it's always nice to exchange ideas on this.
Yeah. Well, for everyone listening, thank you for making it to the end or jumping to the end or whatever you did to get here. Uh, we've got more episodes of DejaVue coming up, and we've also got a bunch that have already been released you can check out. And as usual, links and all of this stuff will be in the show notes. And yeah, we'll catch you in the next one.